rich and poor both are paying through their nose for the water. And by 2030, 90% of the people will be getting water from the public sector. How do we improve the performance of the public sector? A new way of providing them with water, not the conventional way. Money is not a problem, technology is not a problem, management is not a problem, water availability is not a problem. The problem is us.
In your opinion, what do you think is the biggest challenge to water security in urban areas, especially in ASEAN?
I would say there are two biggest challenges. The first is the political will, which is missing. And for nearly all ASEAN countries except for Singapore, the people are so used to getting a third-grade service, they don't think any other type of service is possible. That is, so on the one side, the politicians give a lot of lip service to water, but in reality, none of them are interested in water. In all the ASEAN countries, except for Singapore. And Singapore has its own special problem. And the public just accepts the third-grade service. This is the biggest problem. They don't complain. They don't throw out the politicians that are not willing to provide basic clean water. So from my side, I see two very important things. The politicians have to be serious, and the public who elect the politicians say, basically, if you guys don't give us clean water 24 hours a day, we're going to throw you out.
It seems like kind of a chicken and egg problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
The people are not used to getting good services, so they don't know what to expect, and they don't make demands of the government, who in turn then does not feel the need to prioritize. What do you think should be, like, where do you think we should start in addressing those two challenges?
In my view, you have to first go to the people. The politicians left to themselves, they haven't done it for a few generations, they're not going to start now. We have to tell the people that all the excuses the politicians are giving are only excuses, they are not facts. They say there's not enough water. My response is very clear, bunch of baloney. They say there is no money, they're spending more money than necessary to give them clean water. They say that people cannot pay for water. Actually, rich and poor both are paying through their nose for the water. In all the ASEAN countries, water is too cheap. And the urban water supply that goes to all the ASEAN countries except for Singapore and to some extent in Manila, the prices are also very cheap. But the coping cost of getting that water, making it drinkable, you're paying probably 2 to 2.5 times, the consumer is paying 2 to 2.5 times of what it would cost if they get a good service from the utilities directly. And I don't care who provides the service. In my view, whether the public sector provides it, private sector provides it, I say good luck to either of them. If you can provide a good service, which is equitable, which is cost effective, whoever can provide the service, let that group provide the service. That's the least of my worries. But in all the ASEAN countries, one thing you have to remember, that many of this dogmatic debate between public sector, private sector is irrelevant. If I look at the ASEAN countries, to 2030, I doubt very much more than 6 to 7% of the people, or maximum 10% of the people, would be receiving water from the private sector. So the question is, the discussion should be not whether the public sector, private sector are paid, because even by 2030, 90% of the people will be getting water from the public sector. The main issue should be, how do we improve the performance of the public sector, which is basically missing from the political and the social agenda of these countries.
You've spoken a bit about, governments in ASEAN getting things wrong, overspending, under prioritizing water. But what have you seen that they're getting right? What lessons what success stories are out there in ASEAN that other ASEAN governments can learn from?
On the urban water supply sector, except for Singapore and a few bright spots in one or two cities, I don't see much progress. That is the sad part. Even in Singapore, I think my personal view is they have kept the price of water low for a long time. My thesis is the price of water should be around 2% of the household income, not individual income, household income. In Singapore it is significantly less, and I suspect that is the primary reason why the water consumption in Singapore is much higher than normal. It should be. It's about 154 liters per capita per day, which to me is extraordinarily high. Hamburg uses 105 liters per capita per day. Barcelona, very similar. Saragossa in 3-4 years' time expects to go through the 100 liters barrier, lower than 100 liters per capita day. So in all the ASEAN countries, in my view, a big problem is they haven't got the price right. Some cases hopelessly wrong. Singapore is doing quite well, but still they could improve. Take a look at Bangkok. From the independent analysis of Bangkok metropolitan water supply, the thing that surprised me that 80% of the Bangkok residents do not drink that water or use it for cooking. They just have some processing or heating before they, or heat it, boil it before they drink it. Yet, by all accounts, that water is clean. So why are all these Bangkokians are not using the water? Vast majority of Bangkokians not using the water. Answer to me is very simple. It's so damn cheap, everybody thinks it cannot be any good. And so they go out and buy bottled water for drinking, even though the tap water is quite good, because they have the conviction that since all the government services are lousy and the water service, they're giving it at such cheap price, how can this water be any good? The price is so bad, it's a human tendency to believe that nobody gets it free good. So since they're getting it so cheap, it cannot be any good. So the whole issue of pricing needs to be looked at, which is not happening. And that goes for the entire ASEAN country. For political reasons, they think, sadly, they think if they increase the prices, they won't get elected. I would argue, if you increase the prices, if you can convince the people they are getting a good supply, you provide good supply, it will be difficult for those persons who projected that philosophy not to be elected. It's an electoral benefit rather than a liability. We have to educate, inform the people why they are not getting a decent service. And until and unless we educate these people that this service is your right, you can get it, money is not a problem, technology is not a problem, management is not a problem, water availability is not a problem. The problem is us. We have a lousy management system and a lousy policy which ensures people are not getting decent water, or even when they're getting decent water, they feel it's no good.
I'm going to go back to a point that you made earlier, which is quite interesting about public sector provision versus private sector provision. You say that you feel that it's an irrelevant debate, whereas many other people around the region have been debating about it for a very long time, and they seem to think that it has a very significant impact. Mm-hmm. Do you not think that there are any inherent differences between private sector provision and public sector provision of water?
It really doesn't matter who provides the water, as long as they can provide clean 24-hour water supply at a reasonable cost. And the pricing structure is such or you have a tariff structure that is such, it's financially viable and poor have access to it. And it can be done. So it's not a dogmatic discussion. There are dogmatic views on both sides. There, in my view, they just create a lot of hullabaloo over a minor issue which is not important. The supporters of private sector say private sector is efficient. Well, our center in Mexico did an analysis of all the developing world, the public sector and private sector, and the developed world. The world's most efficient public water supply companies, two most efficient, by far, are public sector, Tokyo and Singapore. The global situation with respect to private sector has changed. The Western private sector, which were primarily French and the British at the beginning, they are extremely reluctant to go for any concession in developing countries except for China. What will happen in China, I do not know, but in China they seem to be quite okay. Kathmandu has been last several years trying to get a private sector. No takers. And they are basically, the Western private sector have decided that they are not going to lose money and their share in developing countries because of their business model. But what we are now seeing, the emergence of some regional private sector companies. They are not Western. Within ASEAN, the Manila Water is now looking for possible expansion in other parts of the ASEAN countries, or not only ASEAN, even South Asia. So you might see in the future some of these regional players going. How successful they will be, I do not know. Can Manila Water duplicate their success in Indonesia, India? I don't know. The culture is different. They may be developing country. The culture is different. The institutions are different. The legal system is different. And Manila Water knows how things are run in Manila, but Indian situation, Indonesian situation, or Brunei situation are likely to be very different. So whether they'll succeed or not, there is a tendency, human tendency to think, if I succeed somewhere, I should be able to duplicate that somewhere else. And that may not be the case.
Back to urban water governance and the challenge of providing water to the poor population and maybe the urban migrants that might live in semi-permanent housing areas which are either sometimes illegal or difficult to access. What do you see the main trends or the main performance criteria for water utilities in ASEAN?
Even for the urban slum dwellers, there has to be a different way of providing them of water. What we have seen all over, not only in the ASEAN, but all over the developing world, the moment you provide either a stand post or something for the urban, because saying you cannot give house connection, provide a stand post. The water runs 24 hours a day. Nobody is responsible. So what we have to think about is a new way of providing them with water, not the conventional way, or thinking. Phnom Penh, if you go to the slums, they have their individual house connections, slums. There's one room, but they have their own connections, their own meter. We are seeing some very interesting ways of providing water in the slums. One I saw not in the ASEAN countries, but the ASEAN countries can, I see no reason why they cannot look at that model and see how that model can be fit. One I saw is in Morocco. What they have done is in the slum, the utilities provide water, clean water, but it doesn't go to the people directly. They are selling that water at a cheap price to what they call a guardian. Each standpipe has a person responsible for it, and the slum area chooses who is the person. The utility doesn't say you are going to be in charge of that. So let's say you took the concession from the Water Supply Authority. In Morocco it's called ONEP. From ONEP, the person in charge has a contract with ONEP. ONEP sells that person water at 6 dirhams per cubic meter. 6 dirhams. And that person sells it to the other slum dwellers at 10 to 11 dirhams per cubic meter. The profit for the guardian that goes for his salary or her salary, about 15% of them are women. Their salary, operation maintenance, cleaning of everything. The interesting thing is when the guardian knows he or she is going to be charged for water, they make sure there's no spillage, no leakage. You go to one of the sandposts in Morocco, they're spotlessly clean, no water around the sandpost, absolutely none. So there are models available which one can take a look and say, oh, this system, it's working in Morocco. It's been going on now 6-7 years. Can this be replicated, perhaps with some modification in ASEAN conditions? I don't see any reason why some of these models cannot be done. I have very little sympathy for some of the NGOs or the social activists. They go around and say, if this poor family uses more than 50 cubic meter per person, per household, per month, then they pay a very high price which they cannot pay. It may be good rhetoric, but it doesn't make any sense. Why? If you look at the water consumption before the Phnom Penh people provided the direct house connections, their water consumption was less than 5 cubic meters per person per day. Less than 5. No matter which slum you go to, you will find less than 5. So, and that water was dirty. They got from the private vendor, and it was costing them 3 to 5 times of what the subsidies. So before they used to get a very low quality water at a high price. Now you have given them more, and the social activists are saying, why shouldn't they have more? Well, if they have more, that means the lifestyle is better, and they have to pay for it. And the second issue is, if people don't pay for it, I don't care whether it's rich or poor, there can be no water conservation. Absolutely none. So unless people pay for it, they would not realize the value of water. And all this talk about that poor has no money, I don't understand why about water. The poor has to eat food. They have transportation costs. They have health costs. They have education costs. They are not free. Why the water has such a mystique? So all the politicians are worried about water and say you can't pay for water when it's 2% of the less than 2% of the household cost. Make it cheap. As a result of which the utilities has no income, no incentive to do anything, and the people don't bother about maintaining water because there is no need to have water conservation. So to have a financially sustainable water utility model, make sure the water is properly used. There is no question in my mind. With 100% certainty, I would say water has to be priced. And that is one of the things our politicians have not learned. And if they have learned, decide to ignore it, and they think they can get votes by this type of unorthodox, unacceptable, and long-term, expensive policy alternative.